Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Conversation, Sondra Perry, Andrew Ross, and Mendi and Keith Obadike. My name is Nico Whedon, and I am Public Programs Manager here at the museum. Tonight's talk will feature exhibiting artists Andrew Ross and Sondra Perry, who will be joined by Mendi and Keith Obadike to my right, to explore perceptions of truth and reality as rendered through a variety of media. Acknowledging the role that technology plays in mediating our existence and skewing the boundaries between fact and fiction, this conversation will engage these dynamic gray areas where traces of signifiers often stand in for the absent subjects, signs, and symbols themselves. The program will begin with brief presentations from everyone on the stage, followed by questions for each other, and then a question and answer segment at the end, so please be sure to hold on to your own questions until the end. And if we have enough time, we'll do an artist-led tour of the exhibition upstairs. So hopefully you got a chance to see A Constellation on your way in. Did you? Yeah. Okay. That's why being late sometimes works out. So I'm just going to read some amazing bios right now. I'm sorry, it's going to be weird because you're right there, but it's just how this goes. Sondra Perry is an interdisciplinary artist working in video, sound, performance, and digital imagery. Perry's multifaceted practice is influenced by the work of science fiction writer Samuel Delany and investigates themes of power and agency, especially as they are determined by race and gender. Oh, sorry, iPad. Identities. Perry uses familiar technology such as web pages and Photoshop to create works that confound reality as a way to highlight intersectionality and identity. Perry has exhibited in group shows at the Seattle Art Museum, Lima PS1, and right here at the Studio Museum in Harlem. The artist has participated in residencies at the Skewing School of Painting and Sculpture, Vermont Studio Center, Oxbow School of Art and Artist Residency, and the Experimental Television Center, and is currently an artist in residence at the Core at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. Perry received a BFA from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University in 2012. Oh, yeah. And an MFA from Columbia University School of the Arts in 2015. And we're so lucky to have so much of your family right here in the front row.
Hey, Ma. Hey, Grandma. Hey,
Andrew Ross is an interdisciplinary artist based in Brooklyn, whose work conjures an awareness of actions embedded in static objects, teasing out backstory, precedents, and slapstick. Often at once humorous and depressing, his sometimes sleek, sometimes saccharine sculptures and photographs draw from a mock objective standpoint, while including transparent sarcasm and ulterior motivations in their designs. Through representations abundant in visual equivalents of red herrings and non sequiturs, Ross explores theatrical strategies of address and abstraction and subliminal messaging. Ross received his BFA from Cooper Union, where he was awarded the Jacques and Natasha Gaiman Trust Award for exceptional ability in the field of sculpture. Congratulations, that was hard to say. He's been a participant of open sessions at the Drawing Center in 2014 and 15, and resident of the Skywing School of Painting and Sculpture in 2011, Lower Manhattan Cultural Council's Swing Space in 2013, and Atelier Mondial in Switzerland in 2014. His work has been exhibited internationally, including at the Drawing Center, A&A Gallery, Venice, Basement, Basel, and Signal, Brooklyn. Give it up. Yeah, okay. And last but not least, Mendi and Keith Obadike make music, art, and literature. Recent projects include Blues Speaker for James Baldwin, a large-scale sound installation at the New School, and Free Phase, the latest in their series of Americana suites, which debuted at the Chicago Cultural Center. They exhibited their suite American Cipher at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 2013. Their work has been commissioned by the Whitney Museum of American Art, The Kitchen, Rhizome, the New Museum, the New York African Film Festival with Electronic Arts Intermix, and the Whitechapel Gallery. They've released 2 albums on Bridge Records, 2 artist books on 1913 Press, and a book of poetry with Lotus Press. They've created large-scale music theater works, including The Sour Thunder at the Yale Cabaret and 4 Electric Ghosts at the Kitchen. Keith received a BA in Art History from North Carolina Central University and an MFA in Sound Design from Yale University. Mendi received a BA in English from Spelman College and a PhD in Literature from Duke University. They are recipients of the 2015 Louis Comfort Tiffany Biennial Award. Okay, so I'm going to go away now, and we're going to start with Andrew, who's going to talk a little bit about his work.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? First of all, thank you to Nico and Alex for organizing, and thanks to Amanda Hunt for creating this awesome exhibition that I had the pleasure of being in. And so I'm going to go back to some work that's a little old for me, trying to get at a through line about a kind of confusion of pictorial space and representational space. And I think while I'm showing you my work, you might be thinking, well, that doesn't have much to do with technology and how we can use that to confuse fact and fiction. But I do think that relates a lot, because I'm working with making this confused space between what you're looking at and what the thing is telling you to look at, or what it's telling you you're looking at. So I'm starting with this older piece. It's a video. I don't know how to make the video start on this clicker. Can somebody back there press the play button? I'm pressing it. Well, it's this piece has two kind of mechanical parts to it. Some people in the audience went to school with me and probably remember it. I called it a synchronous machine, and the top part goes back and forth and the bottom part spins. And so it gives you this it tells you that there's this kind of relationship between the two. But then it's blatantly obvious that it's not there. And so that's like a representational line that I'm constantly trying to play with, something that's like clearly not what it's telling you that it is. What happened? Sorry. Give us a second. Okay, can we stop that and go to the next slide? Okay. Yeah, so from there, I kept thinking about pictorial space and the way that the photograph can fool you, and trying to find ways to do that with things. So I started thinking about photographs as kind of cross-sections of spaces, and like with the second image on this page, having things float in front of them so that those things can go over one side or the other as you walk around it, kind of leading you to imagine that this is a piece of something and there's more space around it, which is, the frame of a photograph naturally does, in a sense, but to make that feeling more aware, make you more aware of that feeling, and I started doing it more with other physical objects, trying to kind of flatten space and play with where you are and where these things came from, and your perception of them. So, like for instance, the third image is a piece of plywood that I bartered from a store, and it was covering a broken window, and it's one of 3 pieces that together said "Danger, do not lean." I took it down, and planed down the back to its top veneer and taped it to the wall. So it was this effort to make it as thin as possible, so it becomes like a picture of itself. But then it's also, the edges are cut off, so you're left to kind of decipher what, because I like to kind of leave my references out of place. I have a lot of references, and maybe I'll talk about them as we keep going. But I like to kind of forget about them once the piece is up. So then you're kind of left to puzzle over where this thing came from. Then I also started thinking about perspective and perception, and like trying to force perspective onto an object. So, like with this first image here, I was trying to take a thing that already existed. It was a potted plant, and try to make it look like how I thought it looked in the dark. And it's like it's a fleeting pursuit that would never work, but it's that problem that I couldn't get it that I was after, and then also what happens to the thing as I'm doing that. Like, clearly, like, I'm killing it, and yeah, so these little moves bring up more issues. So then, yeah, so I'm also I'm doing a lot of work about, like, things that are not what they are. So I started using found objects and proposing to do with them what I think they're normally associated with, but to do it wrong. So then it is that thing, but it's also not that thing. So that's what this is. The thing on the left is part of a series I did called Reverse Engineering, where I didn't really reverse engineer anything. I just kind of remade an idea that previously existed. And I'm still thinking about photographic space with the piece on the right. And also like this kind of liminal space between things being representative of something. Like, I wanted to talk about, like, there's this time when I feel like artists would say, like, they'd point to things in their pieces and say, like, that represents this dove represents peace, or whatever. But I like to kind of, like, to poke at that, but not do it. And I do think that in a way deals with technology. I'm gonna have to formulate that thought better as we go on. But sorry if these are kind of blown out, but more versions of this idea. The one on the right is a pretty clear idea of this, to me, of kind of forcing pictorial space onto objects. It's that I ask myself, like, how do you, if I make a drawing three-dimensional, kind of also, like, knowing that it's not going, or intentionally allowing it to become something else as I'm doing it, purely by virtue of making it stand up. So in this case, it's a hangman drawing, and it's upside down, and a lot of these pieces have a title that kind of reveals the original impulse, but then I want you to kind of walk in and wonder, what is that, and not know at first. And in a similar way, this piece on the left, which is like an enlarged version of a person's thumb, I would expect people to walk in and think that it's representative of a particular person's thumb, and it's important, and it's like the fall of like a monument, but it's just an earnestly sculpted thumb of a person that I knew. It's kind of like a portrait in a way. More explorations of pictorial space. I'm starting to, as I go on in this, through these slides, I think, the pieces are going to get more and more colorful, and more have actually more and more imagery in them, as I'm trying to kind of charge them with imagery that is that's associated with like a certain economic demographic, or stories that I've heard, but what I mean by like economical demographic, like for instance, this one on the right, it's called Yacht, and the idea was that I was making just like a portion of a vantage point with looking off of the edge of the yacht, and so it's like, you don't own a yacht, you can look over this, but it's also like, nah, you know. And then it's also just kind of this abstract thing. So I'm thinking about still thinking about photographs. These are both photographs, and vantage point, and starting to set up dioramas and installations in my studio that try to screw with the intended vantage point of something, of an object. Like, so both of these pictures are made from essentially the exact same setup, just different angles that transform what the image is. And then again, that one on the right is made from the same model that was in those photographs. So then as a object, like, I'm asking myself, what happens when you try to represent a particular vantage point three-dimensionally? And obviously you end up with more vantage points. You don't end up with that vantage point. So, you know, I think people read this as kind of like an exploded space. And in a sense, like, I find that interesting because, like, the imagery that I was working off of was from old ships. This is from a Zeppelin. And I was actually originally attracted to it because of the way that the windows are slanted. Like, if you imagine, like, you're in a blimp, and the windows are probably, like, slightly slanted so you can look down. And that's actually what first drew me to it. So that's how I started to think about that vantage point. And at the same time, I started to think about origin stories, and like the idea of origin. I mean, it comes up a lot with my work, just simply in terms of like when this thing was made, when it looks like it was made, or whether it looks like it was made by an artist or it was found. And so then I also started to embrace the hand's way of like abstracting things so that they approach an image that I'm interested in. Like in this case, on the left, it's a reclining figure, but then it's only that because I say it is in a way, and I find that really interesting. And it's hard to see in this picture. I called that piece on the left exotic reclining figure, and I simply called it has this like kind of antenna thing in the middle that's made of bamboo and aluminum, and I was really interested in like making this very uniform gesture, and then putting this other thing that's not related in the middle, but integrating it into it, and have that be kind of a signifier for a place where this could have come from. So, yeah, and then lately I have been thinking about, I'm bringing more like everyday imagery in, and I'm thinking a lot about decorating tools, and in a similar way to how some of those pieces like yacht and the ship pieces are dealing with kind of vantage points that seem lofty. I'm thinking about now like vantage points from service, from like a service industry, or yeah, thinking about like decorating in order to survive, and also a bit of a metaphor of the tool, like making tools that you could use, like in this case for making food, and the tools that I use to make the thing itself. And continuing, I'm like, as those were really kind of cute, and I'm continuing down this like road of trying out languages that kind of mismatch my own standpoint. So like I find it kind of I guess in a way, like, if you want to talk about othering, like, I'm trying to kind of reach, like, a really ubiquitous audience, as though I'm othering them by being really really loud and really straightforward, but also being sarcastic, you know? So I think, like in this case, this phrase, "It's my pleasure," is kind of inherently a bit sarcastic. It's like the kind of thing you say when you've helped somebody and they say thank you. And yeah, so now I'm trying to introduce other languages, other types of languages aside from just visual into my work. Bring in text, and like how can I animate that text, and how can I use my tools in different ways. And anyway, yeah, it's hard. It might be getting really confusing. I'm getting confused too. Yes. Yeah, we'll talk. Sorry. Yeah, I want to get to the conversation anyway. But yeah, now I just keep expanding essentially. Like now I'm thinking about, like, as you notice, like there are very few figures in these works, but I've been thinking about vantage point a lot, and like how vantage point can implicate the figure. And now I'm starting to introduce kind of caricatures of figures, and still playing with this sarcasm, with their expressions and how the imagery kind of teeters between excited and kind of domineering or like overly excited. Yeah, and I'm gonna leave it at that, but please ask me anything later and we'll go back to
Hi.
Oh, there's one more.
Oh, here. You want Do you want to?
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
I'm Sondra. Hello. Thanks everyone, Nico and Alex, and Amanda, and Doris. I think I'm missing people. So the video that's up is in the show if you haven't been able to see it yet, and it's one of two videos that piece is. It's a 2-channel installation that's looping on one monitor, and it's called double, quadruple, etc., 1 and 2. And the performers in the piece are Jordi Mignana and Danny Giles. This is Jordi here, so this is the only thing we're seeing. And I want to play a little bit of it here because I like showing the work really big. I think there's a presence that I think this piece has, especially when the two videos are projected right like across from each other, and you're able to kind of walk in and between the videos and the space. And there's something that happens with kind of like the hypnosis of the figures moving around. So this is just my studio space, and I had Jordi and Danny move around ferociously. That's what I asked. That's the direction that I asked them to do. And so they did like 30-second performances, pretty much, of moving, and then a rest period, and then moving and rest period. And then after that, I brought the video into Photoshop and used the content aware tool to duplicate the space in the video on top of their body. And so that's with both of the videos. So they're about 9 minutes long each, but they're really like one performance. So they're like 30-second videos that are like looped over and over and over again. So we can go to the next video. So generally, I guess I'm interested in a lot of things, and I like, for all the artists here, you like know that interest kind of oscillates in between how things are visualized, I think. So there's I have an interest like kind of in aesthetics, but like not so much of like making the work look the same. We could, oh, sorry. I can talk, it doesn't matter. So the pieces, with these pieces, I was kind of interested in this the Superman mythology of there's this space where the criminals get sent in the comic books, which is called the Phantom Zone, and so in Krypton, Superman's father was in charge of he was like the defense minister, and so he was in charge of sending people to the Phantom Zone, and it was supposed to be kind of like an ethical way to like punish people. So you'd do something wrong, you'd be sent into a Phantom Zone, which is like an alternate dimension, but it's an alternate dimension that you can see. You can't interact with the you can't interact with the regular world, but you can kind of see what's going on, and that's supposed to be like cathartic for you. It's cool. It's technology. So it's fine. And I was thinking about like how torturous that must be to be able to like see what's going on everywhere else, but not have kind of any like agency on your own to be able to kind of like interact. And I was thinking about like how political positionings can be that in that way. So often about maybe false senses of representation or visibility, but not actually having power yourself to make any like sustainable change within power structures. So there's that. There's also the thing I really love about that video is that it's doing this thing with the foreground and the background, where the figure isn't totally invisible. It actually becomes hyper visible by the background being kind of placed on top of this figure. So there's kind of an obscuring of the figure, but also kind of the pictorial space, about foreground becoming background, background becoming foreground. Something happening there that I think like kind of translates to like how I think the video like works like politically. And then there's the space of kind of this frantic movement that I've been thinking a lot about. I did a performance talking about like outliers in data, and how the outlier in a data set can obscure the results for an entire kind of study, and how outliers are the things that you kind of don't want in your data set because they're supposed to they have a negative effect on the rest of what you're seeing there. But I think that there's some type of power in kind of like the outlier space, where the rest of the data is like hyper, kind of like, it's hyper visible because of this thing that is not a part of like the normative whatever. So like I think that video does something for me with that. And I do think that there is something about like projected video and then being able to like move in video space is really, I really love that. And I haven't been able to show that piece that way ever. So one day I hope that I can, and like be in that space with those videos and have and allow what's happening there to like happen. So these are the next slides are from a piece called Lineage for a Multiple Monitor Workstation, and I'm just going to go through them and I'm going to go back so you can kind of see what's going on. So this is a 2-channel video installation. And this is up at Greater New York right now, and it's I really like the installation. Oh, sorry. So I checked that out. So one video is slightly smaller than the other, and the installation mimics the desktop workspace that I was making the video on. Where one of the monitors was slightly lower resolution than the other, so it approximates that. So these pieces I've been interested in green space, green screen space, green chroma space, and blue chroma space for a while, and I didn't realize that until a couple of days ago, when I was looking at some video that I made like in 2010, where I was using the same techniques to make the video, but just not visualizing them. So I've been working with that for a bit for like other reasons, more like visually aesthetic reasons. This piece was made in Perth Amboy, New Jersey with my family, and it started as I went home and asked everyone to participate in this fictional, a fictional family, what's the word I'm looking for? Ritual. Where everyone would don these chartreuse green balaclavas and these black sweaters, and we would proceed into the house and do a ceremony of peeling sweet potatoes in order to ask the ancestors for permission to visit my grandmother's, where my grandmother grew up in North Carolina. So it was like it was a ritualized kind of like asking the elders something. During that process, I asked my family to tell me like stories that I would know about their about how they grew up, but insert fictions into them. And so I was 3D printing, or not 3D printing, I was 3D scanning everyone's head. And when I say 3D scanning, I mean I was taking like round pictures in the round of everyone's head. There are these free programs on the internet that you can use to recreate, to make your own kind of 3D scans. There's one called 3D Catch. That's free. Technology. And so while I was doing that, I was filming everyone and asking them to tell me these stories that they were inputting their own fictions in. And my grandmother told me that she would bury the flags that she like hung outside of her house after they were torn up. She would bury them in her backyard. And for some reason, I thought this was true because everyone told me that it was. And that wound up getting into the piece. So in this video, there's footage of my family with these masks on, these masks and sweaters on, doing a procession into the house, singing a gospel hymn. There's footage of this, everyone around the table peeling sweet potatoes. There's footage of unburying, a staging of an unburying of a tattered American flag from the backyard. There's footage of my 3 little cousins. These are 3 different videos of them using cell phones to capture themselves. There's footage of them playing around in front of my mother's house with songs behind it. There's footage of desktop windows moving around in green screen space. So that's what the video is. I didn't put the video in because we have like limited time, so I didn't want to like kind of. And so the video is edited through clips that I've like pre-edited, and then those clips are moving throughout the desktop, so you can kind of see what's happening here. So it's a kind of like a live edit of a video on 2 desktops that you're seeing together, basically. That's the procession scene, and the desktop background for the entire video is a chroma key green background. And I've been trying to think about like how imaging works, how imaging people work, and what I keep coming up with is like this. I think about a series of points that make up a subject, like think of them like a series of dots that like make up who a person is and all their experience, that are all very much so connected. And so the closer you are to this series of dots, the more complex that figure or subject becomes. And the further away you get from it, the more solid and the flatter that subject becomes. And what I'm trying to do is get as close to the subject as possible so you can see the dimensions and complexity there. So video space for me works, winds up doing that for me. I can put video on top of video where there are several things happening at once, where there's complexity there, things that might not make sense in the moment can make sense later once another video has kind of like been pasted on top, or not, depending on what your kind of subjective positioning is and where you're coming from. So video space, the timeline, and multiple channel installation is that for me. Being able to have these perspectives that are going on regardless of if you're paying attention to them. So like a non-linear space that has some type of agency in its own to do whatever it's doing without having to be in a black box or without having to have the restrictions of linear narrative. Okay, so, and I'm just going to show these other pieces. So this is my mom, and we did a performance in April. I've been working with these glasses that have perpetual eye rolls on them. And so these are some gifts. This is another performance called Young Women Sitting and Standing and Talking and Stuff. I think there's one more. Okay. So these videos have these, we can talk about it later. But basically, it's these monitors that I take out of their housing. It's very, very DIY. And like I hook up a Mika player, which is it's a video player. All of the components are attached to the body of the performer, and they kind of walk around and do different things. Perception. Oh, I think I'm doing something wrong. Here we go. And so this is what I'm working on right now, like yesterday. So this is my brother, and this is a 3D scan of his head, and this is what these programs do. They kind of like lay out all of the information, and then this is a test of Blender, which is an open source software, and those black and white things are kind of like placeholders that tell you where the space is. And so these are 3D renderings, and my brother played Division I basketball, and he's in a couple of video games. And if you know anything about college sports, it's like pretty like horrendous how they treat their players, and they have when you sign your contract, they have the ability to render your image without you give them permission, basically, so you can get your scholarship, so you can play, so you can do all these things. And so we're going to be working together on this project about imaging and the ownership of yourself and your image and things like that. And I'm done. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Thanks, Nico and Alex. So we're going to talk a little bit about some projects from the past year, and we'll quickly go through some old things, but we won't spend a lot of time on these things because we're interested in jumping into the conversation. So this piece is an installation from last spring. This is Blue Speaker for James Baldwin. So it's a large sound installation that happened at the New School, and this is in New School's University Center on 14th Street, 5th Avenue. And show a little bit of video. And so a lot of our work today, we're doing a lot of sound installations these days. Yes, Carmen? Okay.
Thank you.
And so with this piece, you want to talk about how it worked?
Oh. So, we're James Baldwin, and we used we were tracing a couple of ideas of his, the idea of social responsibility, the role of education, and the responsibility to listen to one another. And so we took selections of text and made a multi-channel sound installation and used the windows University Center of the New School as a resonator. So we turned so we went to first of all, so you hear some words from Harlem, downtown, the center. The other things that come up is maybe mention your pieces of
freedom rests in my voice, and I understood at last that he could help us be free if we would listen, and he would never be free until we did. It wasn't like living with a person at all. It was like living with sound, and the sound didn't make any sense to her. Didn't make any sense to any of them, naturally.
Also kind of working with the spelling of Baldwin's name. We've done a series of praise songs, and so the harmonies that you're hearing in it, those little sinusoidal sounds, those things are coming from, how to explain it? Well,
system that we created for assigning tones to letters.
All right, so that's Blue Speaker for James Baldwin. And this is a piece we did last fall, Member Station Affirmative Movements. This is performed at Ryan Lee Gallery. And we're doing a series of numbers works. So I think everybody knows about NYPD and Stop and Frisk. So the ACLU put out some stats on the number, self-reported data from the NYPD about the number of stops that were happening at each precinct around the city over the past 14 years. Mm-hmm. And so we took that information and we performed it meaning that we read through the data, we read through the data collected over these years, and we generated sounds from that data. So, precinct number 81 did, 300 stops in 1 quarter, then we made a 300 hertz sine tone. And then we broadcast this performance from the gallery space over shortwave radio.
Say, in case people don't know, that furtive movements is the #1 reason for given by police for a stop. So the thing about furtive movements is that they're not defined. Anything can be a furtive movement.
And so that performance was approximately 30 minutes, and after we did the live performance, and the sound remained in the space. So we should probably, you want to stop there? Should we click through some of the old things?
We could just show some images. Yeah. Sure, we can talk about the rest of them. Blackness for sale.
Blackness for sale on eBay.
Interactive colors.
A new school brown paper bag test.
Pink of style.
A game about pinkness.
Yes.
An opera about an African novel.
Big house disclosure.
A house song about slavery.
American Cipher.
Come on. It was here. That bell belonged to Sally Hemings, who was Thomas Jefferson's slave. It's her last known possession. It lives in Monticello. Even though Howard owns it, we made a sound piece from it and a video work from it.
Freeways.
Okay, so in Chicago, we were playing fragments from Freedom Songs from the top of the Chicago Cultural Center. So morning, noon, and evening, kind of like a sonic spotlight. So you see a large speaker there projecting down into the Millennium Park, playing pieces of Freedom Songs. There are a couple of other parts of the project, but we can talk about that later. All right. So we're really excited to be here. We're really happy to talk to you guys. Love your work, and so when they ask us like if we wanted to do this, we say, oh, yes. The only thing better than talking to you guys is like doing it in front of an audience. So the first thing I want to ask, in different ways, you guys are hilarious. And so I want to ask about humor in the work. Like, what are you thinking about in terms of humor with the work? What do you think an audience might think as they encounter the pieces? And I mean, obviously, the humor that I'm feeling myself is also kind of, there's a lot of stuff pushing against it too, and that's part of why it's interesting.
Maybe.
Yeah. Or yeah, maybe you don't agree.
Definitely agree. I think humor is a way to show, like, two sides of the same coin. I think usually a joke is about things mismatching, and so sometimes actually I don't intend to be funny, and it's just funny because I'm interested in things mismatching, But then I'm trying lately to intentionally be funny sometimes too.
I don't know. This has come up before, and I feel like I should have an answer now.
Okay.
But I'm not really.
Do you think that you're working with humor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and especially with performance, it's kind of. It's a great way to kind of like gain trust, in order to.
Yes.
In order to like make people feel comfortable with what's gonna happen next. I mean, there's something about like about the vulnerability of that,
Yeah.
of like possibly like failing to make someone laugh, that I think like people really kind of they appreciate. I mean, I do. Like, it's really tough to like be in front of a ton of people and to try to do something humorous or witty, and then and when it like works, it's you're doing this communal thing, you know, and sometimes it doesn't, and that communal thing still happens. But like the fact that like it could fail miserably, I think is like kind of what kind of creates like a bond with audience. Yeah, and it's just like it's a tool. It's like with the video work, it's a storytelling tool that I think is a part of like my natural toolbox.
That's really interesting. I think, I don't know how much that's readable in our work right now in the humor, but it's something that we both, spend a lot of time. Like, there was a period of our time when we practiced telling jokes, like to think about how the humor could work.
And that's not to say that we ever got good at it.
Oh my God. I mean, we were like, we're not going to go to sleep until we can make a joke together. And so we would like, but we just got more avant-garde, like the jokes. But it's interesting to think about what that can do. Looking at the show, one of the things that we thought, I mean, we lived in Harlem for a while, and even before we moved to New York, we would come to the Student Museum. So this is a really special place for us, and it was kind of great to come to the show and see all these people who are younger than us here. That was just amazing. And we realized that when we were being paired with you guys, that we're the old people, and so that was new for us. Like, this, that isn't always how we get seen. But we're interested in thinking about your generation, and we wondered how you think about community. And just to give you a sense of what we're thinking about, we're talking about how much our work changed when we moved to New York, and part of what that was about connecting with a whole bunch of artists who were here, or even people that we knew from other places who also moved here. And so we were able to collaborate in new ways and just see different things. And we wondered, what's the role of community in your work?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, I mean, this is probably going to like roll out of me, and maybe I'll get to an actual answer. But the first thing that comes to mind is the artists and creators that I spend my time with the most. Like, some of the best curatorial experiences that I've had are when this guy Alex is in the room. He from Signal. Say hello, hey. He's an awesome part of my community because he like works. He activates modes of thinking with me. He knows how to read between the lines when we're having a studio visit. A lot of my studio visits are like, I have nothing to show, I'm just talking at you, and so I need people that can figure out where I'm going and like visualize things with me. But anyway, the other thing that automatically comes to mind when we're talking about community is the internet and Facebook, and how all of us, I mean, I'm actually like not really an active Facebook person. I'm on it, but I'm always like reading other people's things. I find it really hard to share things all the time because I can't decide what's important enough to share. Otherwise I'd just be sharing everything, so I just leave it at nothing. But there are a few key characters that like end up kind of defining like what I think about in that month or whatever based on what they're sharing, you know. I could think of a few, but I mean, I don't know if I need to name any by name, but yeah. I mean, to like keep talking about to like make this a real conversation. Like I think that like since I was invited to this talk, like I've been watching you on the internet, you know. Yeah, of course. Like, I see some from you, and it's like, and I think that your work relates to your identity on the internet in a way, you know. Like you have a piece on your website right now that's like, it says it's a website called I Make Land Art, and it's like it's a picture of it's a screenshot of your tweet that's in a video, and you know I think it's, I'm sorry if you don't want to talk. Like I think we're all trying to find ways, like I mean like there are so many ways to share your opinions on the internet, and then some things are kind of one-offs and some things are not. And actually one of the things I think is really interesting about Sondra's work is that what is her personality and what is her work is like blurred, you know, because of those connections, you know. You want to?
Cool. Thanks. That's yeah. It's good. Well, I know most of you from the internet. Like most of the people that I know here from the internet, pretty much. Well, I'll go back to community though. So I guess the first thing I'll say is that I image a lot of people in my work, so it's like kind of totally what it is. To like get super like physical and stuff about it, like when I image like my family, there's something about like accountability to the people that you image that automatically kind of like sets up this like this space of like this reliance on one another to make sure that you have like checks and balances with the work. And that also extends to how like I commodify things too. So me working with my community or working with my family, working with my friends, it's like it's one of the most important things about my practice. Working with like Black and brown people, and like how they're imaged and how their images are commodified is like one of the most important things about my practice too. So the internet, that internet space, like it saved me so many times, I have to say. It saved like my actual sanity, like it helped with so much. Community too, like it's there's this place where like the people that I'm talking to on a regular basis, we're like complaining about like what's happening to us and to people who look like us, and then we're being then we're just being, you know, and like having like pleasure in being, and those things can like oscillate in between, like a complaining and a doing, and then like a being, and there's like no questioning why that has to be that way, which doesn't happen in many other spaces, you know, about like being a complex human being who can think about more than one thing at a time, and then not have to explain yourself over and over again. And that's what like my connections to like most of you on the internet has really kind of helped with, and like really understanding that that like is like it shouldn't be like an exception of like how to live, you know.
So I have a question that's kind of in a different direction. I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about your kind of evolving relationship to your materials, right? So I'm interested in the range of things that you work with, and this kind of tension between, like you said, what it looks like and what it actually is. But also, I know that we talked earlier about you starting out, you know, as a ceramicist and then sort of moving to digital work. And so could you talk to us about the materials and how that shifted for you over the years?
Yeah. I've always been interested in mold making and casting. It's like kind of defined the way that I think about objects. And I find it really exciting because it's, well, I like that I can think about it. It shows me a way, it kind of defines a way for me to think around an object. This is how I often say it to people. It's about thinking around the thing, but not the thing itself, you know? And so it's like it'll always be there. It's like a way of thinking. No matter what materials I have access to, it'll always be at my disposal. And there was a long time when I was, I would always make this form that looked like a mound, and I was really into this idea of like a dome that was just a jumble of shapes, and that you could make a mold of that and kind of solidify it, and then also like how the mold can be hollow, so the mound then gets like the way that you formed it then gets flattened into this like shell. And yeah, I think that, I don't know, that way of thinking is still in my work, and it's kind of, and now I've just been bringing it into a more photographic language. But even the pieces of mine that look like drawings are often done in a kind of mold making way, because I'm interested in a mark that tells a story, basically. Like I really want, like if it's a spray paint mark, I want the edge to be a certain way, I want the drip to be a certain way, or if it's supposed to look like something spilled, I want it to spill a certain way. So I'll practice it, or I'll do it in a way where even though it is by chance, I can pick from a bunch of different attempts and then make a mold of it, and then that's when it becomes solidified. Yeah.
To the materials. Barbara. I'm telling. Sorry. Cool. So I think. Okay. So I started making. I went undergrad for ceramics, and then moved over to the digital work. And I think the only reason that happened is because I didn't really have any like art experience before, before high school. So I was just making ceramics, and then when I got to school, I realized you could do all this other stuff, and so I was just really excited to learn. And wound up taking a bunch of other classes, and the digital work just kind of stuck. I'm really like kind of like dedicated to video as a medium because of all of the things that it can do. Like I'm a television baby, a medium that can kind of duplicate itself over and over and over again is really fantastic. Where like kind of origin is kind of set aside because that's not what the I mean, like the original, it's like it winds up being like this fetishy thing that like doesn't really have anything to do with what the actual content is. So I like that, and I like that every time like you try to like commodify it, it just like totally changes because it's wrapped up in a technology that's constantly evolving. So there's like some type of like I don't know if it's like freedom. I wouldn't say it's not freedom, but like it's an elusiveness that it seems like it makes sense with the work, and like and then like as like a practitioner of like making the thing, it's so much fun. It's so much fun to like be in the timeline and to like kind of and feel pacing and how those things are kind of like translated through rhythm, like a visual rhythm or something. It's like kind of fun to kind of figure out what that is in kind of like in each piece, and it's just really cool when like the content and like the form like work so well together, you know. And that's what I've kind of found with video. And, like when I'm doing performance, it's like I have no idea what that monster is. Like I still haven't figured it out. So maybe in a couple of years I can answer that question with that. But to make this a real conversation, so when you were showing your work, you were talking a lot about vantage points, and I'm reading. You follow me on Instagram, Sondra Perry 01 on Instagram. I'm reading several essays, book of essays, and I think it's the second essay. I forgot what it's called, but she's talking a lot about the horizon and about like how horizon point has changed and what that is, what perspective is. So it's like this static visual space where one person gets to have like kind of privilege over everyone else to get like the perfect kind of like point. And how cinema and video is kind of progressing now is that the horizon has like verticalized, it's done all these other things. It's like it's kind of moving out of its kind of historical space, like in the same way that it moved out of its like this place of perspective in painting. It's doing the same thing with like cinema. And I wonder if you think about your work in cinematic space at all.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it in terms of cinematic space a lot lately, and I'm hoping to work in that. Yeah, I'm thinking lately about like the piece that that's in the show here. It's an image that I altered. It's just a photograph that I digitally altered, and I think that like I've been thinking a lot lately about how a photograph now is so detached from the time of its taking. And I think that this can relate to what you were saying about origin in digital work. Because of the nature of working digitally, like working in Final Cut, where you're on a timeline, and the timeline is linear, but you're working back and forth to get that perfect combination. That kind of thinking can happen on a two-dimensional surface as well. But there's a lot that I'd like to explore, and I'm hoping to start exploring more with in doing that over time. Like when something transforms over time, or if you're walking past it, it looks slightly different from the new perspective, for instance. Yeah, I mean, and I also think that, yeah, my work is very animated. There's a lot of, like, things are askew, like literally askew, and so there's definitely like this illusion of time in it, and so yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But yeah.
One thing I do want to say about origin too. That's a thing that always bites me in the ass about the digital origin, because I think it's an amazing space to there's a lot of possibility there, but it's also where we get into some trouble about like not acknowledging like the physicality of like internet spaces and the physicality of like the tools that we're working with and like where are they coming from, and so I wanted to say that because I always like.
And that made me think. I think you just posted on Facebook about something about. Didn't you post some pictures of like the insides of the internet, right? So
It was like an Atlantic article. It's another artist, I think, who did some shooting in New York. Some of like the data farm places. But yeah, because we assume that it's the digital is like ephemeral, like essentially ephemeral. We forget that that there is so much there that's so physical, which is why when the eyepieces, all of everything is visible, and it's like really messy, and it's like kind of important for me to like to show what that messiness is, and like to acknowledge what the desktop space is, like all of those kind of user interfaces that we assume with like better technology are like hidden from us. Like the easier something is to use, the better we think it is. The more kind of concealed it is, the products that we use, all those things. The sleeker, the more minimalist something looks, the better. Which I think is a huge issue.
There's a lot there. I'm trying to think. Should we get into that? I mean, so I mean, there are these questions about, ornamentation in art, right? So this is this long conversation that preceded even sort of minimalism happening, and so yeah, how are you guys thinking about what to reveal of your process in the making of the thing? I mean, I know you're both thinking about it and showing it and concealing things in different ways, but I think you touched on it a little bit. But part of why I'm interested in your work too is because there's also this thing of masking in your stuff. There's something like literal masking. It made me think about masquerades, both in the video piece that you have in the show, in the sort of green sort of ski mask and the eyepieces, But also, I was going to say, Andrew, in your pieces, I think there's something. I think the breadth of it, the breadth of the things that you're doing, kind of resist an easy read, right? So I can't say, oh, this person who's schooled in this kind of thing is making this stuff. So in that way, I feel like there's some kind of identity play happening there too, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, that was like, it's something that I grew into. Like, I started off I just would make things and not have like a clear connection, like from one thing to the next. And then after a while, I got kind of excited about that and tried to continue doing that, which is, and yeah, because really like what I'm thinking about when I'm making a piece is so far removed from what it looks like so incredibly far removed. And then I don't know, sometimes I don't care to let people know, because it's not always important in a way. I think that is another strategy that I can take, given that I have a history of working within a wide breadth, that maybe I can start to introduce more found content, more of what is aside from the little hints that have come into my work with the imagery and the text that does lead somewhere. I can start bringing in the influences, as varied as they are, and yeah, I don't know.
I really feel you on the thing winds up looking like something totally different, and that being totally valid way to make work. The masking and and kind of the revealing is so much of what I'm interested really in right now, because I think for so long we've been told that being visible is the thing that you want to be, right? And being visible allows you political representation. It allows you to become a citizen. All of these things, and I think that a reality is that we've been hyper visible for so long. And I think that abstraction, there is a power in abstraction. There's a power in the cloaking of the self. There's also a power in vulnerability too, and in visualizing yourself in a way that can connect you to a community, that allows connection to happen. But I think it's a tool that we can use however we want to, whatever visibility means to us, whatever kind of visualizing we want. And if that visualizing means an obscuring too, I think it's totally valid.
That's so interesting, because we were asking ourselves what that masking was about, in your work. And at one of these talks a million years ago, Mona Simpson was saying that she wanted to photograph Black women, but she didn't want to give everyone, all the viewers, all the access to them, and so that's why she was photographing from the back. But in looking at your videos, I thought, well, especially with the eye thing, it's that seems like a personal. I don't know if it's because it's video or what, but it seems like it's not just about the audience. It's in my day-to-day life, I don't have to show you my real eyes. There's something very freeing about that representation. So it's good to hear you talk about it. But we were having a lot of conversations about what that was.
And we just talked to someone else. We were having a conversation with jazz pianist Vijay, and we were talking about artists communicating, artists concealing, and we got into this thing about the right not to be. The right to be obscure, the right to not be understood completely, right? And then in that conversation, he quoted Thornton Dial, the artist, and Thornton Dial said, if we understood each other, we wouldn't need art, which I thought was the best quote ever. So I wake up every day and I look at that quote and just, yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to open it up. Do you want to take this? Hello. How's it going? Wait. Okay. You're talking about the internet.
I'm loud. You're talking about the internet being a space where you can sort of be yourself amongst, like your own people and not have to explain and like stay sane. But has it ever made you like feel the opposite way? I know a lot of people take breaks from like social media and the internet because it's like too much. And then also in terms of like cloaking and not giving people access to like all of your stories.
For sure. Yeah. Like right after I finished school, I had to take a break from everything actually. It's like something, but like everything. And recently too, there's a thing about like especially Facebook that I could like go on for days about like how Facebook is structured and how it's like terrible and all those things. And then we could all probably like say how great it is too for that amount of time, right? But there, visual like terror, like I'm personally tired of seeing bodies of dead black people. I don't need to see that in order to know that is a reality, and it has been since like forever. You know, that's been the biggest thing for me. There's also the fact that that's like auto playing, and the fact that like Facebook gets like a profit off of everything. So they get profit off of like terror, and they get profit off of cat pictures, and they get profit off of like all of it. Like that's enough. Like that's like enough for me to like just like be tired of it. But also like kind of being bombarded with people's thoughts. It's like sometimes I don't want to hear anything that you have to say, and it doesn't have anything to do with you. I just don't want you. It's like this is new. This is new to like what you were saying before about like certain people, certain individuals like kind of tailoring kind of what you're thinking about and like reading about for like weeks at a time. I think that's new. That's a new phenomena that who was I talking to yesterday? That we're either like we're getting used to, and it's like this is like a test period, or that will like morph into something else later. I'm not sure. Kind of like what that's about. Yeah, and there's a thing about like being accessible all the time, which gives me lots of anxiety. The fact that like I can get an email, but then like also like a Facebook message, and then there's like 5 things to check now, and it's all in your pocket. Yeah, and your phone's charged, and you're like, you know, yeah. I have a lot of anxiety, so that's definitely there. But then there are also like kind of like the spaces that we're both a part of that are just like tremendously life changing, you know? Exactly. So it's just, yeah. Great question.
I think we should try to, with certain technologies, we should learn from them whatever we can, but try not to rely on them at all. Like something I have so much trouble participating in certain like social media things because I find that it's like another one of those things where when you talk about it as an entity and how it changed, you're talking about they, like that like mysterious they of people that do things. And you know, like I like to think about how the future of communication a lot, and like been thinking about the singularity a lot lately, but a constant moot point that I keep running up against is that it's always talking about they, as in like the people developing the apps and stuff, and it's like there's gotta come a point where either you become an app designer yourself or you stop caring what they do, you know? So that's the way I feel about it. But
That's a literacy question too. That's about. I mean, that's a total language. Like, several languages. About. There's a really good book called Program Review Program that I'm listening to on my phone, and it's like it's really good. I mean, it's like kind of like common sense stuff, but these are languages that a lot of people do not know. You don't know what your interfaces are. Like that's what kind of was what I was talking about with like these minimal spaces that are like so easy to use, but and it's an illusion that this thing is a streamlined, complex thing that's like responding to your everyday. It's like no, it's like these are engineers who are creating like algorithms, and these things are networked and programmed in these very specific ways, and I think
yeah. But then also when you're aware of it, it's kind of fun to see how it curates you.
Yeah.
Like anyway, sorry.
I think someone did an experiment where they like wiped everything on their timeline, and it like changed how the algorithm kind of like spoke to them or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I only bring that up because like sometimes at least for me, I want to see where it goes, like I want to see what happens when I respond to like a spam email, or like this. You have this desire to like see, like to uncover the mechanism by delving into it. Sometimes.
Does anyone else have a question?
Want this, or do you want to?
I was curious, in relation to everything, that seems like you can kind of modify something as a post-digital copy, and how that ties into breakdown.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like it shows the mechanism so well, so it's like quite ridiculous. And if you think about like how the art market works, it's like okay, who was I talking to? I was talking to a couple people about this, about like how like to physicalize like digital space, and like there's like this really awesome thing happened where Rhizome got like a huge grant to like to do some like digital archiving. It's way more serious than that, sorry. And it's like, it's so bomb, it's like amazing. But I wonder, I'm wondering what's gonna happen with that. Like, this also has a lot to do with the archive, about making things like available for posterity or for like whoever. And that's extremely important, yeah, but
That's what I was thinking about it. That's what we even care in 2015 about pirating.
pirate.
Just like,
Mm-hmm.
where archives work, that are
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have really huge issues with Kenny Goldsmith, the person who started UbuWeb. And a fun story. When the website began, he had this page called like the Page of Shame, where he would put up artists who would refuse or who didn't want the work on the website. And there are some artists like me who are using appropriated material. And when you're kind of like putting it into, this is the thing about like being able to remove yourself from visibility. They were getting like summonses from copyright lawyers, and so like that was really, I mean, but it's and that's an aside. I understand that's an aside, but I do think I think it's important to have access to that type of stuff. But I also think this is a larger question about like, why do these things need to be commodified this way, and why do you need to edition video work in the first place? Because you want to make money, because you want to sell things to make money, because there is no like public arts funding, because like in a country that like supported the arts, like artists wouldn't have to sell like 5 videos or something in order to like make a living. You know, it's like a huge. This is a bigger like, it's a bigger issue for me. I think generally about like why these things are being commodified in the way that they are. And the cool thing about video and like digital work is that it shows the apparatus so well. You know, like, let's make some custom USBs and sell, and you know, or like let's put a SD card in a giant box and sell it. You know. Like, but I do think archives are really important. But it's also like who has access to that archive. And that's as important as being able to kind of sustain this work.
Running out of time. Have any last things that you want to say to each other before we kind of walk out through the galleries? You don't have to, but.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you all for coming. And we have about 10 minutes, so if you want to make it up the stairs and through the main gallery and see their work in person. So yeah, thank you guys so much.
Oh, you got one. I don't give her your. You're like, oh. Oh, thank you guys so much.
How do you feel?